Roberto A. Almodobar, exactly 3,351 words, P.O. Box 1661. First North American serial rights, Klamath Falls, Oregon 97601. Copyright 2003 by Roberto A. Almodobar. ralmodobar@gmail.com. Aaria. Roger Neville's jaw dropped open when he first laid eyes on her. She was an absolutely voluptuous creature that only God could conceive of, the kind of woman that mortal men would and did kill for. He couldn't figure out how in the world a weakling Stephen Jones latched onto her and watched with envy and fascination as they approached from the far side of the park. It was the annual company picnic, good politics to attend, even if you had to come alone, but Jones sure didn't come alone, hell no. If anyone was going to make an impression, stand out in the crowd, Jones most likely would. "Hey, Neville," said Jones, ushering his date through a small crowd of company employees, finally reaching a table decorated with rows of champagne and soda cups. Neville stood next to the table with a cup in his hand. "Neville," said Jones again, "I'd like you to meet Aaria." Neville was mesmerized by the woman. Her emerald green eyes contrasted wildly with her long black silky hair, and that smile, there was something angelic about her smile. She had a smooth square chin with high blush-colored cheeks, and the round curves of her petite body sent chills up his spine. "Aaria," continued Jones, "this is Roger Neville." "Glad to meet you, Aaria," Roger said in awe, his heart beginning to race. "Jones, please tell me this is your sister," he added, smiling. Roger Neville's breath was taken away as her smile widened. He glanced at Jones, wondering what the connection really was. Then she reached out, extending her hand to shake his. The contact was electrifying. Neville felt himself taken away, and as he touched her, smelled her, he noticed a twinkle in her eyes. More than that, the spark of life in them. She smelled of strawberries. Something changed as he released her hand. It was as if she had cast a spell on him. Stephen Jones watched Neville with a grin on his face. He enjoyed seeing that bastard twitch with envy for once. Under any other circumstances he would never have brought Aaria out. She had remained his treasured secret, but now more than ever he needed her. She would bring him the attention of his managers and peers, a little respect, that's all. "I am happy to meet you, Roger," said Aaria. "Stephen has told me of you." Neville detected a wonderful accent in her voice, unlike any he had ever heard before. It was a beautiful melodic sound. "Well, Neville, we'll be moving along now," said Jones, satisfied that Neville had been shocked enough. "We'll be over by the food," he continued, ushering Aaria away, flashing his eyebrows at Neville. She looked over her shoulder, smiled at him, winking an eye. Those beautiful intense green eyes seemed hypnotic and burned a hole through Neville's heart. He cocked his head slightly, managing to smile back, trying not to look like the hungry animal he must be. "I want you," said those gleaming eyes of hers. He was sure of it. She was calling him out, behind Jones' back. A newfound hatred for Jones started at the pit of his stomach, swelled up like a balloon and worked its way up his throat. Neville felt like the kid who wanted the shiny new red bicycle, but the kid next door got it first. He stopped short of drooling, his throat lumping up painfully now as he watched the most beautiful woman he had ever met walk away. He took a sip from his drink, forced it down, tried to contain himself. Neville chuckled to himself. Jones either had a golden cock, or a whole hell lot of money. As hard as Neville tried, he couldn't get Aaria out of his mind. It was as if she had become part of him at the picnic when he touched her. He could still smell her, found himself as the days went by thinking more and more of her. Soon it became an obsession. It started to affect work. His accounts were slipping. He had become possessed by this strange woman. She had indeed cast a spell on his soul, infected his mind. He had come to hate Stephen Jones more each passing day. Every time he saw Jones, he would think of Aaria, think of both of them, the things they must be doing. The things he himself should be doing. Neville bolted up in bed in a cold sweat, his chest pounding and his blood bubbling with adrenaline. His body was trembling uncontrollably. He paused. It had all been a dream. It was the same as before. Jones had a baseball bat in his hands, professional series, and proceeded to beat someone to death with it. Neville only watched in horror as Jones beat the face and body to a red pulp. Finally, the bat shattered, and a fine warm red spray fogged up Jones' glasses. Neville took a deep breath, held it in a moment, let it out slowly as he glanced around his quiet bedroom, rubbing his pounding chest. "Fuck," he blurted in the darkness as he laid back, his body trembling. The dreams had started the night of the picnic. At first it was pleasant. He would wake up in the middle of the night smiling, having believed it was he and Aaria walking around the picnic. That day, and it was Jones and the others who had the look of envy on their faces. This time the dream had become worse. Jones had become a madman. Neville's newfound love in Aaria was ending in bloody nightmares. As he drifted off to sleep again, he wondered if the meek and mild-mannered Stephen Jones actually had the ability to become a crazed killer. When Neville woke up again from the same nightmare, he didn't have to think twice about it. Several weeks went by and Neville had managed to suppress his nightmares. He found that the combination of a Valium and a can of beer did wonders for sleep. The lump in his throat had finally deflated and even his work began to improve. It was when Neville approached Jones in the parking lot one day after work that his real nightmare began. He wanted to apologize to him for being such an ass these past few weeks. He couldn't of course admit that he had fallen in love with Aaria himself, but at least he could get the bad feeling off his chest. He approached Jones, who had the side door to his van opened and was rearranging a few boxes there. "Hey Jones," he said, coming up behind him. Jones turned around and eyed Neville. There was a strange gleam in his eyes, distant, perhaps hostile. "Stephen," continued Neville, "I wanted to say I'm sorry for being such a dick these past few weeks." He didn't know what else to say. "I've had some personal problems, didn't mean to lay them on you, okay?" Jones smiled at him. "It's okay Neville," he began, "Aaria has that effect on a lot of people, mostly men though." "I understand." He turned around and moved a couple of boxes. "I managed to keep her in line though," he said, half chuckling. "You never know what they'll do once they get hungry enough." For an instant Neville wanted to bash in Jones' head. The little fucking geek had the nerve to flaunt him like that, knew all along that he was craving for her. He was about to tell the little son of a bitch to go fuck himself when his heart skipped a beat. Skip to. There in the back of the van behind one of the boxes was a baseball bat with the words "Professional Series" embossed across it. Just like the dream. Only this bat wasn't cracked yet. Suddenly Neville grabbed Jones by his shirt and shoved him against the van. Hard. "Jesus Christ, Neville," blurted Jones, crumpling like a rag doll, "what the fuck is wrong with you?" Neville stared into Jones' eyes. "What's that baseball bat doing in your van?" he said wildly, his heart now starting to race, sweat forming on his brow. The image of Jones with that bat standing over a crumpled, deformed body filling his mind. "Aaria. I play goddamned softball on the weekends," whined Jones, frantically trying to pry Neville's balled fists from his shirt. "Anything wrong with that?" he yelled. Neville's mind raced and finally realized how ridiculous it must seem for him to come unhinged about a simple bat. There must be one in every other van across the country, for Christ's sakes. If the police happened to get involved, he would be the one looking like a fucking nut. He released Jones, but the lump in his throat had started to knot up again. Aaria's mysterious spell had infected his mind, more than ever now. She was calling him. "Get the fuck away from me," blurted a distraught Jones, who quickly slammed the side door to the van then backed away from Neville. "What's wrong with you anyway, you on drugs or something?" he said, climbing in the driver's seat and closing the door. Neville could smell strawberries. Jones, wait, said Neville. Look, I'm really sorry, he blurted. I had a dream that Aaria was in trouble. How is she, Jones? Stephen Jones looked down at Neville from the comfort of the van, his eyes gleaming. He should never have brought Aaria to the damned picnic. He wondered how many other men might have been affected by her. She's just fine, he said. If I were you, Neville, I'd forget about her. She's not for you. I don't think you could handle her. Besides, buddy, she's mine. Neville stepped away from the van as it rushed off. His mind was still reeling about the goddamned bat, about Aaria. What did Jones mean when he said he managed to keep her in line? Something about her getting hungry. She was calling him again. He could feel her voice in his head, could smell strawberries. He had to do something. He returned to the office building. The staff had gone home, and the receivables management department was cold and quiet. The room was littered with the shadows of steel case furniture, and the black empty screens of resting computer terminals. It didn't take much for him to force open his supervisor's file cabinet. There he would find personnel file folders and knew he would obtain Jones' address. It was a large two-storied Victorian flat off of 18th Street in the Mission District. Apartment 4, top floor. Neville had parked his car down the street and noticed that Jones' van was nowhere in sight. As he looked up at the lighted windows, he tried to think what reason he could use to being there. But she had called him. He decided to get it over with. He just wanted to make sure that she was okay, that's all. So, he approached the apartment, rang the bell. The door mysteriously opened by itself, creaking on its hinges as it slowly moved inwardly. Neville wasn't surprised at all as it opened. Many of the Victorian row houses were built with mechanical door openers on the top flat, so you didn't have to run all the way down the stairs. "Hello," he said, stepping inside, glancing up the long narrow staircase. "Jones, Aaria. You two home?" he continued. "Roger, Neville," said a familiar voice. It was Aaria. She came around to the top of the stairs, more beautiful than ever. She was wearing only a bathrobe. Suddenly Neville felt out of place. Almost awkward. "I knew you would come," she said, her green eyes gleaming at him. "Please come up, Stephen won't be back for an hour or so, he's out getting dinner." Neville thought it strange when she said she knew he would come. Something was wrong here. He didn't really believe that she had somehow called him. That was only his imagination, or was it? "Aaria," he said, "I know this sounds funny, but is everything okay here? I mean, are you all right here with Jones?" asked Neville, turning to look behind him at the still open door, fearful that Jones would come home, find him there. Aaria giggled. "Of course I'm all right," she said. Her melodic voice echoing softly through the air. "Please come up. I've been waiting for you a long time. Since the picnic, remember?" She seemed to tease him in the way that some women will, and that hard lump in his throat turned to burning desire for her. He went up. She smelled fresh, the wonderful scent of strawberries now strong in the air. He was taken by surprise when she came to him. It wasn't his fault, he was only a man. She had the power that all women had, knew how to use it and exercised every bit of it. No time for conversation. Soon Neville found himself wrapped in her arms, didn't care at all about Jones anymore. Wouldn't care if he caught them right now in his own bedroom fucking his woman. All that mattered was Aaria's love, her wonderful laugh, and the electrifying smooth feel of her skin. Neville closed his eyes. She was everything and more that he could hope for, softer than silk, sweeter than molasses. They had finished what Roger Neville had secretly yearned for these past few weeks. He figured that Aaria too must have craved for his love, after all she had called him, hadn't she? He found peace of mind at last. Smiled, even had Jones woman after all. Fucking Jones. Suddenly the quiet that they shared was interrupted as the doorbell rang several times, followed by the jingling of keys unlocking the front door. The smell of strawberries gone. Neville's heart raced as he quickly tried to dress himself, was more amazed that Aaria just laid there, seemingly without a care. "Aaria," blurted Neville in a half-whisper of a scream as he heard footsteps climbing the stairs. "Jesus Christ, Aaria, it's Jones," he said. She only smiled at him, eyes gleaming, then slowly wrapped the bed sheets around herself. "Dinner time," she said, giggling, almost whispering in her melodic voice. Footsteps coming closer, louder now. "Fuck," blurted Neville, glancing around the room frantically. He clutched his shoes and anything else that might be his and quickly made off for what had to be a closet door. Aaria only giggled at him, never moved from the bed, and suddenly nothing was funny. "What a fucking crazy bitch," he blurted to himself as he hid in the small closet staring out through narrow slat redwood planks. He tried to control his breathing, to remain calm. He should never have come, she was just too beautiful, it wasn't his fault. The door to the bedroom opened. Neville took a deep breath, held it. "Aaria," said Jones, breaking the silence, standing in the doorway, glancing around the room momentarily. "Sorry I took so long," he said, "you should get up now, I brought you dinner." Neville's heart raced, he slowly let out the breath he'd been holding, hoping it wasn't too loud. Sweat began to form on his forehead, adrenaline started to flow. From inside the closet, he couldn't see Jones, only knew that the fucking geek was standing in the doorway. Aaria took her time in slowly rolling out of the bed. She never reached for her robe, just simply got up, butt naked, shook her long black hair out and faced Jones. Neville stared in terror. She was so beautiful. "I'm so hungry, Stephen. What did you get me this time?" she asked, her green eyes widening, then narrowing like a cat. Jones took several steps into the bedroom and tossed a burlap sack onto the empty bed, then turned and quickly left, closing the door behind him. Neville let out a sigh of relief as he heard Jones lock the bedroom door from the outside. His only escape would be the window, he hoped to God there was a fire escape out there, or a roof or something. Then movement caught his eye. The sack wriggled around, something alive was moving in that sack, something trying to escape. Aaria's eyes seemed to glaze over as she lay down across the bed on her stomach and gently released the drawstring to the sack. A small white rabbit appeared, sniffing the air with its pink nose. She carefully picked up the rabbit and quickly pulled the sack closed. She kissed the rabbit gently on its head, smelled its soft fur, rolled it against her face, stared into its red eyes. Tasted it? Neville froze when he saw Aaria's tongue emerge to flick at the rabbit. Not only was her tongue red and long, but it also ended in a fork. He dropped the shoes and clothes he was clutching, didn't care about the noise now, and stared in horror and disbelief. He wanted to scream but found himself just staring helplessly. Mesmerized. The long red tongue thing contrasted wildly with her beauty as time and time again it tasted the rabbit. Neville gasped in horror. It was impossible, almost erotic. He had an involuntary erection while a scream was poised at his lips. Aaria continued to kiss and taste the rabbit before slowly opening her mouth wide, then gently forced the rabbit's nose in. It began to struggle wildly as she clamped her teeth around its muzzle and held it firmly, drawing it closer. "No, Aaria," blurted Neville, whispering as his voice left him in horror. He could only grimace as the rabbit slowly died from suffocation. Neville's erection faded as his heart began to race. Horror filled his soul. For the first time since meeting her he was terrified. This wasn't a nightmare. Wanted to burst into the room, but found he couldn't move. His feet, legs, frozen, wouldn't obey his commands, and suddenly he was trapped. He looked. On in horror as the rabbit stopped moving and the beautiful woman who moments before, was making love to him opened her mouth wider. Wider still. Neville saw two sharp fangs in that mouth followed by an array of dagger-like inward-facing teeth as she moved her jaws from side to side, the skin of her smooth rosy cheeks stretching, fading, as her lower jaw disconnected from the upper. And opened even wider still. Soft skin fading into reptilian scales. Neville finally screamed as her head transformed into the hooded shape of a giant female king cobra. Slowly the rabbit began to disappear, inch by gruesome inch. Aaria's eyes rolled back in their sockets as she worked her jaws back and forth. Suddenly the bedroom door was unlocked, and Jones quickly entered. He glanced around the room suspiciously. Thought he had heard a scream that couldn't have come from the rabbits. In his hand was the professional series. Neville began to scream wildly now, loudly. The rabbit passed easily from her mouth to her throat, which swelled up unnaturally into a large ball, then powerful muscles forced it down her thin neck. Neville suddenly heaved his guts up, half choking, half screaming. Aaria looked up, noticed Jones, then turned towards the closet and glanced at Neville, green eyes slowly rolling back into place. Smiled at him, tongue flicking the air. Neville felt the first crack of the bat against his skull, followed by an eruption of red spray. As she turned back to the wriggling sack, he never felt the second crack of the bat, as his brains spilled out on the plastic-lined closet floor. Jones carefully cleaned up and prepared Aaria's next meal with a grin. She normally ate live prey. He turned and watched her swallow the second rabbit. He was confident that she'd like the taste of Neville so much, she would make an exception, and smiled.